같이 먹는社吃点野鸭. I like the 보배 보니까
The day after our arrival, we went to the local neighborhood watch unit's office for registration. Foreign visitors like us needed to report to the neighborhood watch unit's office every week for record keeping. When we were on our way there, I received a phone call from Public Security Bureau and I was asked to meet them. I told them that I would talk to them after I got myself registered at the local neighborhood watch unit's office. It took roughly 1.5 hours at the office. The clerk there kept examining our passports, turning each and every page and taking pictures simultaneously. They also took pictures of us. We were asked so many questions like, when did you arrive? When are you leaving? What's the purpose of your trip? What are you going to? What are your names? Where is your place of residence? The clerk was filling out a form as we answered all the questions. After the registration, we were taken to a propaganda room. In that room, the walls were plastered with posters and photos of wartime propaganda Chinese heroes like Dong Chunrui, Lei Feng, and Huang Jiguang, about whom we were taught when I went to Chinese elementary school. Suddenly, one female clerk told us that she needed to explain all the propaganda materials to us. They took pictures of us as the female clerk explained the propaganda materials, keeping a record of their efforts to explain and educate the foreign visitors. So I called the Public Security Bureau after I got home, and they asked me to meet them at 10 in the morning the next day. When we arrived there the next day, we were taken to an office outside the main building. The Han Chinese male officer whom I spoke to on the phone interrogated me there. I was interrogated for nearly 2 hours, but I felt like only 40 minutes or so had passed as I was so nervous. My family members who went there with me that day were disturbed by the military tanks that were placed in front of the Public Security Bureau and by guards with rifles. They never saw a place that heavily guarded, so they got scared. Back to the interrogation, they started off the meeting by laying a thick binder full of information about me on the desk and asked me to tell them my story. In that binder were my photos, and I had no recollection of those being taken. I really wanted to ask them where and how they obtained those photos of me, but clearly I couldn't do so.
Do you have those photos yourself?
No, I don't.
Have you seen those photos on social media?
No, I haven't seen them anywhere on social media.
Not even on Facebook?
No, not on Facebook either. That binder was thick, and my name was written on it. As the officer opened it up, I saw detailed texts with clear dates in them. Every second page had a photo attached. I grew uneasy because, at the time, I was experiencing something that we see in movies. So I kept quiet for a moment. The officer said, "Don't lie to us, as we know everything that you did. We did a background check on you before issuing you the visa." I was confused and asked, how was the visa related to all this? They explained that they were curious about my case and wanted to hear my story straight from me. I was warned not to be vocal in criticizing China if I wanted to avoid the potential trouble that would befall my family members. The officer continued to say that there were simply so many Uyghurs that were traveling home to visit their families, and many others were lining up to do so, because it became easier to make the trip starting from the summer of 2023, and that people would continue to travel home to visit their families throughout 2024. They told me that if I wanted things to go smoothly for me, then I should cooperate with them. I was asked to report back to them about ideologically misaligned Uyghurs who would be visiting East Turkestan in the future. A heads up would be appreciated, they said. They also asked me to inform them of future Uyghur activist events and instructed me to tell them all relevant information about the future events and wait for their permission to attend the event in question. I should be prepared to go once I receive their permission and then tell them all about it afterwards. We will let you know whether to attend or not, depending on the importance of the event in question. Right after being told all this, they made sure that I know how difficult the process of issuing me the visa was. All 10 different government departments had to say yes to issuing me the visa, and if one department rejected, the visa application process would end there. So you have to tell us all you know. What have you done? Who were present at that event? They continued. Who do you want to know? I asked. Start by telling us who you know, they said. Dolkun Isa, I answered. They looked at me and said, We know people like Dulkanisa, Rushan Abbas, and Batiyar Umar. We want you to tell us young people your age whom we know nothing about.
The ones that will take up the baton and continue the Uyghur rights advocacy are the second and third generations of Uyghur emigrants. If the Chinese regime succeeds in winning over the second and third generations with various tricks and tactics, the Uyghur rights advocacy will end. Furthermore, we need to pay attention to the Chinese regime's intelligence gathering capabilities, that is to say, the regime's surveillance and intelligence gathering efforts targeting the second and third plus generation Uyghurs. In the future, when Uyghurs in the diaspora who are critical of China advocate for the rights of the Uyghurs, the Chinese regime will counteract this resistance by using the intelligence gathered about those future Uyghur rights activists. In other words, the regime's current intelligence gathering efforts will be paid off in the future. After having gathered private information that can, for example, reveal someone's character or temperament, it will be easier for the regime to carry out smear campaigns against the future Uyghur rights activists with the sole purpose of defaming their characters. The regime should be concerned about the impact the future Uyghur activists can bring. They are well educated and have a better understanding of the world. They are polyglots, tech-savvy, and open-minded. So, the second and third plus generation Uyghurs in the diaspora are better equipped to advocate for the rights of the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. Unlike Uyghur exiles who would more or less refrain from activism or rights advocacy work due to the potential retaliatory actions from the Chinese regime that can be brought against their parents and relatives back in East Turkestan, the second and third plus generation Uyghurs don't have this emotional burden to weigh them down. Like I said, they are in better disposition to resist the Chinese regime. So I suppose that's the reason why the Chinese regime has shown particular interest in Uyghur youth in the diaspora in recenter years. It is to prevent what will likely be an effective resistance in the future carried out by the second and third plus generation Uyghurs.
So we see in the government documents I've evaluated, from the last years, we see already, like in 2000, for example, 17 and 18, there's strong interest in the Uyghur diaspora, very strong interest. And when you say that the nature of this interest has shifted, but the fact that they monitor the diaspora closely is very important, and that's a long-term thing. So when you say that there's an interest now, how do the next generation grow up? I think they might be concerned that the new generation will be very anti-China. And I think the CCP has exhibited a lot of concern about sort of a terror threat or resistance. And that continues, that's been a big preoccupation. And so I would imagine that they are evaluating this from a security perspective of imagined terrorism. That meaning, how the young generation of Uyghurs in exile, are they growing up to be a threat to China? Of course, this could lead to transnational repression, but this looks like it's quite possible that the Chinese state is researching. It's monitoring and researching the current situation. And that's what they have done. If you look at how they've developed strategy, a lot of the development of strategy is through research and monitoring. And that was particularly in the early 2010s under Jiang Chunqian when he came in. So I would expect them to do this. And I think if we look at what are Chinese academic journals publishing about on Xinjiang, what research is being published on Xinjiang, might give some clues. What Chinese scholars are publishing in research. Of course, they will not directly talk about research, but they often have foreshadowed in a research, what the government is concerned about, what kind of research being supported. A lot of research, of course, about the economy, the ecology, development, business, e-commerce, But These are good questions. These are very
I'm in a quandary. The Chinese officials videotaped me and made me say the following. Uyghurs are doing really well, and Xinjiang is booming. News articles published by Western media were only meant to vilify the Chinese government. All of them were fake news. I have seen it with my own eyes, and I can tell you that everything is normal and in good conditions, and that Uyghurs are safe living a peaceful life. So that happened to me, and they forced me to say those things. As a matter of fact, all my older male cousins are still held in re-education internment camps, who were labeled as persons of interest by the Chinese government, and none of them was released. When I asked my mother about my interned cousins, she tensed up and told me to shush. And when I told those Chinese officials that I didn't want to be videotaped saying those things, they said, "So you really believe those foreign news reports and all that propaganda? Are you trying to vilify us? You know, this is considered a big crime." They threatened me with that accusation. They also said, "China is powerful now, and no country is comparable with China. How dare you believe the foreign propaganda? If something happens to you here, your country that issued you a passport won't be able to help you out. We will throw away passports like yours like trash." That's why I got really scared. My mother told me to comply with them, do what they say, and not cause any trouble, and everything would be fine. To be honest, it is true that China has grown more powerful now, and no country can stand up to it. No countries will hold China accountable. So, out of helplessness, I agreed to be videotaped. But after I left and returned to my country of residence, Chinese police officers started harassing me every day, sending me text messages on WeChat and asking for my continued cooperation. I'm in a big quandary. I don't know what to do if they decide to release the videotape online. If I cut off all communication with them, they will certainly release the videotape. I don't know what to do. Everyone will start calling me a traitor when they see the videotape. Maybe I'll disappear and go to some place where no one can find me. I probably won't end the communication with them, but at the same time, it's been a real torment for me. How can I, in good conscience, in addition to risking being called a traitor, stay in contact with the people that are helping the regime to destroy us Uyghurs? I really am in a quandary. I can't sleep at night due to this intense anxiety. It's been really stressful ever since they established the communication channel with me on WeChat. I feel extremely stressed out. Maybe I'll go to the afterworld sooner to escape from all this.
Chinese officials from the Neighborhood Watch Unit paid me a visit when I traveled back to East Turkestan, reminding me that my last visit was 8 or 9 years ago. They asked me what I'd done all these years abroad and posed me many other questions, like, who are in your social circles, and what have you done with those people? What did you study? And right before they left, they told me to go to their office the next day. So the following day, I went to their office in the afternoon. They started off the conversation by saying that, yesterday, you might have felt a little unease or shy in the presence of your parents, and thereby not being able to tell us more about you. So for that reason, we requested a meeting here, today. They knew pretty much about everything that was going on in the Uyghur diaspora. For example, the intense disputes that were going on over the internet among the Uyghurs. They were aware of the conflict between the Uyghur rights advocacy groups. For instance, when I talked about various topics, they would correct me by saying, actually, it was more like this. Because of those repeated corrections, I realized that they knew more about what was going on in the Uyghur diaspora than I thought. They asked me to cooperate with them, incentivizing me to be their informant. They ensured that my future Chinese visa applications would be quickly issued. They asked me to tell my friends at social gatherings that things are good now in East Turkestan and that there's no oppression or genocide. Good things will come your way if you say good things about us. As you can see, there's been tremendous development in China, and the economy is booming. They continued to say that you study computer science. Probably you are not making that much money. There are many foreign companies that have close business ties with China. They will hire you after we introduce you to them, and you will receive a high salary. If you want to start your own business, we can send you cheap merchandise from China. If you want to open a restaurant, we will also help you with what we can. But in return, we want you to be our informant. If there's anything that grabs your attention in the Uyghur communities abroad, we want to be informed about that. If you cooperate well with us, we can also help to send your parents and your younger sister to you. You will be able to meet your family more frequently in the future. You will also benefit from other special privileges. So they told me all that, and I couldn't disagree much with them there and then. When I sounded a bit reluctant to cooperate, they asked me if I wanted to cause trouble for my family and threatened to send my parents to a re-education internment camp. So they would threaten people with things like that. What could I have done otherwise? For the 2-week trip to visit my family, I underwent all that. I had no other choice but to comply with their requests and left their office. Ever since then, I struggled to sleep at night and could only manage to get 3 or 4 hours sleep. I'm also having nightmares. I'm thinking about seeing a shrink as I struggle mentally with many stuff now. On the one hand, you are confronted with the fact that 2 to 3 million Uyghurs have been sent to the re-education internment camps. But on the other hand, you'd think that there isn't much to inform the Chinese officials of, because they clearly know about everything, like who is hanging out with whom and what is going on in the Uyghur communities. They are well aware of all that. Clearly, I don't want to be labeled as a traitor, but if you stop cooperating with them, they would threaten to cause trouble for your parents back home. But if you think about 2 to 3 million fellow Uyghurs who have been sent to the re-education camps, as well as about your friends who disappeared, you would feel the intense bitterness inside of you. By the way, something unexpected happened at the airport right before I left. My older female cousin went to the airport together with my parents to see me off, and she leaned over and whispered to my ear, "Cousin, can't the Uyghurs abroad do something to advocate for our rights?" Right afterwards, tears were beginning to well in my eyes.
This is a game played by and under the full control of the Chinese regime. They know our weak spots and are adept at spotting our vulnerabilities. The regime would guilefully have us Uyghurs deceive each other as it is good at identifying our weak spots. If those Uyghurs who return to our homeland don't accept the Chinese propaganda, they won't be able to leave our homeland. The reason for that is China doesn't respect the rule-based international order, as we usually hear the Chinese officials say. We're not even afraid of the United States. Be it American passport or passports from other countries, we can simply cut it up. As long as we suspect an espionage case, we can carry out the execution at the time of our choosing. The regime's propaganda in our homeland is quite overwhelming.
The Chinese officials instructed that, after your arrival there, you should gather identifiable information about the Uyghurs there and send it to us. Information like who the person in question is related to, who their relatives are back home, what their names are, preferably including the surnames as well, where they live, when they moved abroad, what their home addresses are, and so on. Moreover, they said, even when you go to an Uyghur restaurant, you should take note of who went there. You can ask the restaurant owner about the names of the customers there by, for example, saying that you can't quite recall the name of someone in that restaurant that looks like an acquaintance of yours. Or you can just say a random name and ask if that person is Mehmetjan, and the owner of the restaurant will tell you the correct name of that individual. Right after you learned the name, you should write it down on a notebook, specifying the date, the number of Uyghur customers in that restaurant, for example, out in a market or in the street, what kind of clothing they wore. Take their photos if possible when you don't know their names. So they taught me inquiry tactics like that to gather information. Furthermore, the Chinese officials also threatened me. They said they could repatriate me in a matter of 3 hours by asking their own people stationed abroad if I say something deemed unacceptable to someone while abroad. They said that they have eyes everywhere.
1 month before my departure, 2 or 3 police officers, along with some Chinese officials from the Neighborhood Watch Unit, paid me a visit. They said that they wanted to videotape me. Before I even asked why, they started to prepare and place their camera equipment close to my sewing machine. I'm a seamstress by training, and they knew that. They wanted to create a piece of evidence showing that I was self-employed and earning my own living by sewing. They handed me a piece of fabric, probably red in color, and asked me to cut it up with a pair of scissors, and they videotaped me doing that. They also brought with them beauticians who did my makeup and styled my hair. The sheer fakery of all that was written all over my face. In other words, one can read my facial expressions and know that it was all fakery as I couldn't pretend. "Stop daydreaming and pay attention. Don't pose like that and smile a little bit," they said. After the beauticians did their job, they took me outside and videotaped me in front of my house. We had mountains on one side and greenery on the other. They asked me to stand at a certain spot so that the beautiful view could also be videotaped. For the video, they made me speak Mandarin Chinese and instructed me to say how loyal I was to the Chinese Communist Party, to praise the Communist Party for its achievements, to praise the benefits that we received, to praise the Communist Party for giving us free housing, to say how nice and good our life was, and that we lived a happy life. The fact that we led a happy life was because we were Chinese citizens, and that there were no restrictions on our daily lives. I continued to say to the camera, "I have learned a lot during my 1-year time at the Vocational Training Center. The conditions in that center were really good, and we were served 3 meals a day there, high-quality food. I even managed to learn Mandarin Chinese before my graduation. I meant to say our national language. Because of that education, I now live a good life, and I am self-employed. I have a big shop, and I make a decent living. My life is really good, so is every other Chinese citizen's life. We also receive benefits from the government." So just like that, I lied and said lots of false things to the camera. They videotaped me probably more than 10 times as I struggled to tell those lies with a straight face, in addition to not being able to memorize those words. They said my facial expressions needed adjusting. As I said those words to the camera, I just felt like crying, hence the unapproved facial expressions of mine. In the end, they approved the videotape. After that Chinese propaganda video filming session, I received my passport. The officials told me that I could apply for the Kazakhstan's visa and that I was free to leave the country. Well, not so fast. Before that happened, the Chinese police officers told me that they had to bring me to all my relatives' houses one by one to make sure that we knew that there would be consequences if I so decided to tell my ordeals to journalists while abroad. The police drove me from one of my relatives' house to the next, ensuring that everyone signed the non-disclosure agreement. The police made it clear to all my relatives and told them that, if she tells anything sensitive to anyone after she went abroad, we will hold you accountable for her actions. So the police made everyone sign that non-disclosure agreement. All my relatives got really scared. My aunt told me not to go abroad, meaning that if I don't go, there would not be potential trouble for her or my other relatives. I then told her that my family is in Kazakhstan, so I have to go.
Your life would be improved and the ease of travel would be granted to you only when the Chinese regime trusts you. You would start praising the regime, whether you like it or not, because the regime is watching you and surveilling your online activities. Those Uyghurs who traveled back to our homeland are well aware of all this. They're anxiety-ridden. Of course, their relatives are happy to see them, but this reunion is quite stressful for everyone. Many Uyghurs have to sign a non-disclosure or compliance agreement before being allowed to leave East Turkestan. For example, for some, this security measure may take up to 8 hours at the airport. Take me an example. I was advised to go to the airport 9 or 10 hours before the scheduled flight, so I went to the airport 9 hours before the departure time. They checked everything and interrogated me. I don't know why they asked me those questions, but it was clear that they did their evaluation through the interrogation. In order to leave China, you have to give them the answers that they want to hear. You can't say, for example, the reason for me to travel abroad is I hate the Chinese regime. Some Chinese official told me that when I go abroad, I should say nice things about my homeland to other Uyghurs that I happen to run into. I replied, "Of course, I will do that." The officials continued to say that the Communist Party has helped Uyghur students tremendously through its policies, And if it's not for those policies, Uyghur students wouldn't have gotten the chance of coming to Inner China to study, and they wouldn't have gotten good jobs like yours. Since we have put our trust in you, you should say nice things about China in English, for example, when you go abroad. To which I said, of course. When I was told that they would know my every move even after I leave China, I believe them.
Sending a foreign citizen's information to the Chinese intelligence agency is called spying or espionage. In the eyes of the Uyghurs, it is regarded as betrayal. He who does it can't avoid being called a traitor. It is not insignificant. So that was my first point. Moving on to my second point. What do you think the Chinese regime will do? Right before Uyghurs leave East Turkestan, the Chinese officials would tell them to say nice things about China and the good, prosperous life of the Uyghurs to their friends and acquaintances. We will welcome them to our country exactly the same way we welcomed you. They can meet their parents if they come for a visit.
In the process of intelligence gathering, there would always be gaps. Intelligence officers would liken this whole process to a puzzle. You know, various pieces of different shapes that need to be fitted together to form a picture, for example, a jigsaw puzzle. So there are many missing parts to the picture presented to or constructed by intelligence officers. These missing pieces of information can be obtained through those Uyghurs who travel to East Turkestan from the diaspora. It would probably be the case that these Uyghurs have no idea that they are actually helping the Chinese intelligence officers with their jigsaw puzzle by answering what they might think as random or irrelevant questions. But we know better that the questions posed during the interrogation are often well thought out. Sometimes the Chinese intelligence officers don't have high confidence in their collected raw intelligence, so they would also ask those Uyghurs who return to East Turkestan some questions to see whether they can verify their raw intelligence. Furthermore, in addition to intelligence gathering, the intents of the Chinese authorities also include putting fear in those Uyghurs. We know everything about you, and your parents are still here. We know who you hang out with and which cafe you frequently go to. If, after the interrogation, an Uyghur comes away with the understanding that the Chinese authorities know everything about them, then it means that the regime has succeeded in implanting the fear in the mind of the individual in question. I want to emphasize one thing to the Uyghurs who live in countries that have democracy. Your country is an independent country that has rule of law, and your rights are protected. It is a must. The law must protect you, but you need to know your rights and claim them. For example, you'll find a way through a lawyer, and in so doing, your country will protect you, so will the intelligence agency in your own country. For instance, a democratic country's intelligence agency has resources specifically allocated to counterintelligence. So the counterintelligence agents would help you get out of trouble in one way or another by, for example, taking over the control of your cell phone or laptop that was exposed to cyber attacks originated from China.